Okay, now we are recording. Introduction has been made, and I'm going to share the screen. All right, so I'm calling this presentation Increasing Performance Potential, because for me, of course, this is really what it's all about. It's about performance. It's not about a keyboard. It's about making music and doing it better. So let me here we go. All right. So this is basically what I'd like to talk to you about this morning. The how it came about that I adopted this new idea and what it was like to start what we call a grassroots movement and some years of experimentation and study and coming to a point where we could do international outreach. And I can discuss with you some of the trials and rewards, and then some of the new endeavors, things that we're doing recently. And of course, there's so many new endeavors that have nothing to do with me, and I want to hear about your new endeavors as well. So, midway through my academic career, this was 1999, I came upon this novel idea. And it captured my interest so profoundly that I was compelled to actively embrace it. I didn't at first recognize that I was about to take a leadership role in creating a movement. However, as I began this 22-year adventure, I did realize that this idea had the potential to affect the art of performing for pianists around the globe, particularly females, and also pianists in both their formative years and their aging years. So, what was the problem that I sought to solve? I'm a pianist with a smaller than average hand span, but I knew that I was not alone. What I understood in 1999 was that the conventional piano keys were ideally sized for large hand spans and were too wide for the majority of the adult female population in particular, and also a portion of the male population. And you can see this is a picture of my hand from side view and from above, playing just a E7 chord. And I can reach an octave without a problem, but you can see that it's a bit of a struggle for me to play some notes in between. In particular, if fingers 2 and 5 have to reach the span of a sixth, an interval of a sixth. So you can see not only is my hand uncomfortably skewed to the side, but also you can see in the side view how there's the whites of my knuckles there because of the stretch. So this is, I think, a good illustration of the problem. Also, I understood that the entire 20th century quietly passed without a serious movement to question the size standard. And that size standard was only established toward the end of the 19th century. So it was as if the gods themselves had created the ultimate octave size of 6½ inches or 16½ centimeters. And all pianists whose handspans were created less than the ideal were doomed. We were doomed to struggle, to injury, and limits on repertoire, limits on achievement. But on top of that, it was taboo to even admit it. Pianists often denied that their hands were smaller than what the conventional keyboard demanded. And many pedagogues seemingly ignored the problem, possibly out of hopelessness or ignorance of how to address the problem. So popular techniques sprung up to teach complex movements or stretching exercises to alleviate these injuries. And some have offered significant help, but only partial success for those with small hand spans. So certainly by the year 2000, wellness, the word wellness was becoming a buzzword, but virtually everyone was addressing the problem from the standpoint of changing the human, changing the pianist, rather than redesigning the instrument, right? So immersed in this whole frustrating state of affairs, I came upon an article about a Canadian pianist and an American engineer who had begun building piano keyboard actions with keys narrower than the conventional piano key. And upon further investigation, I discovered that Chris Donison and David Steinbuehler had seeded a handful of Canadian universities with these prototypes. Regrettably, those universities lacked a personal champion, for instance, like Ulrike. And so those prototypes just were reportedly languishing in storage. So I became determined that my university, Southern Methodist University, SMU, should be the first American university to acquire the Donison-Steinbuehler keyboard, so that my students and I could explore the benefits of this ergonomic innovation together. So in 2000, I applied for and I received a grant from my university. And I traveled to Titusville, Pennsylvania, across the country. And I had the opportunity there to choose from various key sizes with which David Steinbuehler was experimenting. So he had no standard sizes at that time. He really needed pianists to come and try out the pianos and give him feedback. And so that was a very important visit for both of us because we were able to decide on a specific size that would be the most important first size to bring to my university. I remember very well sitting at the piano for the first time and just staring at the keys. And I closed my eyes as I wanted to just etch it in my memory before beginning to play for the first time. And this was a very emotional moment. And since then, I've witnessed hundreds of pianists of all ages play these keyboards for the first time. And each time I sort of inhabit them and I feel what they're feeling. Usually people are intrigued, many are elated, and some are actually very fearful. But often I experience individuals just bursting into tears of joy. This happened with a student who studied with me consequently for 4 years. She had never reached an octave in her life. And she actually had an undergraduate degree in piano performance. She was a superb pianist, playing Bach and Mozart and no octaves, taking octaves out. And to watch her play octaves for the first time, it was a really incredible experience. So these moments give me inspiration and new purpose and resolve. And this day that I went to Titusville, Pennsylvania, absolutely changed the course of my life. And David Steinbuehler and I, at that time, settled upon a 5.5-inch octave because it made the biggest difference. We could have at that time come up with something that instead of being 7/8 size was more of the 15/16 size. But we really wanted those with small hand spans to be able to reach a tenth. And to be able to play any literature comfortably. So that's where we started. So in the fall of 2000, due to my grant, one of the Steinway Bees in my university studio, so I have two Steinway Bees in the studio, and one of them was retrofitted with a Donison Steinway keyboard, the 7/8 keyboard, or the 5.5, 14 centimeters. And I immediately set to work on a case study of the effects of practicing and performing on the instrument with the piano students in my studio. So everyone, regardless of their hand size, was experimenting with it. And so this was a qualitative study. We were basically keeping a journal and describing all of our experiences. And then I wrote an article entitled Goldilocks Had a Choice. I think if you, so I put these codes here. Hopefully you can actually go ahead and see if you can't scan them with your phones, and possibly it will take you directly to these articles and websites. I'm just trying this for the first time, so I hope that that works for you. So this article was written in 2003, and it marked the first published study on ergonomically scaled keyboards, or narrow keyboards, or at the time we referred to them as reduced size keyboards. And I must be honest with you, we still don't have a very good, I think, generic name. It does help to say narrower keys. People understand that. It's wonderful that Sirius has a name. But as far as a sort of a descriptive name of keyboards that are narrower, it's very hard to not use words that are things like smaller keyboards, which no one really likes. We have used alternatively sized keyboards. That's a good description. It is a mouthful. So anyone who has a brilliant idea, besides narrower keyboards, ergonomically scaled keyboards, I would love to hear it. So during these early years, I traveled with and without the keyboard to speak to pianists and teachers, and to demonstrate the keyboard for the first time ever at universities, teacher music conferences throughout the United States. And at first, pianists and teachers met this new paradigm with mixed reactions. There were a lot of negative reactions. And I think it was just too new of an idea. Although a large percentage thought it was a good idea, they were very, very skeptical regarding its practicality. And there was the idea that we were actually cheating, that somehow, one should have pain and suffering if you're going to play the piano. And of course, people are very attached to their pain sometimes. So, on the other hand, several professors immediately saw how this keyboard would alleviate injuries and would remove the limits on repertoire and achievement. And so some eagerly adopted it at their respective universities and became strong advocates for the movement. I presented myself as an advocate for a technology change while making it clear that even though I was working alongside the builder, I was not getting any economic benefit. And that was difficult too, because of course, actually David Steinbuehler has never really received very much economic benefit. In fact, he's put in many, 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 many American dollars into this project and has done it for his own mission in life. But of course, it's very important when you are in a university setting to separate yourself from anything that seems like commerce. And of course, I had to do that. So I spent many of my own funds to travel and speak and was careful to make it clear that I was not receiving any benefit. I had to swallow my pride when other pianists patronizingly offered me advice on how to play the conventional piano with a small handspan. I was an award-winning pianist on the conventional piano, and I, of course, had thoroughly explored the methods for playing the repertoire with small hands. But with this new keyboard, I wanted to leave that issue and leave those challenges behind me and see where it would take my students and where it would take me. And beyond that, I was seeking equitability, particularly for women, and a better instrument pedagogically for children. So despite my travel and speaking, the real joy and heart of my work on this keyboard was happening in my own practice, in my teaching studio, and on stage. And as soon as my university was able to purchase a keyboard for the concert Steinway in our main performing auditorium, my students and I began using it for performances on a regular basis. So here is now a picture. The picture on your left, you can see, is on the conventional, and then I'm playing the same chord on my DS 5.5 keyboard. And of course, you understand how much more power I would be able to deliver playing a chord in this position, how I would be able to voice the chord, and how much more comfort level I would have. So early on, the alternate size we were using, as I said, was the 7/8 keyboard. It has an octave size that's 1 full inch smaller than the conventional. And I immediately at that point began to expand my repertoire, and I was able to make some way with some performances at SMU, performing things like the Copland Piano Concerto and Messiaen pieces, the Bartok Sonata, some things that actually I had played also as a young pianist that I no longer could play comfortably. And so I was reviving some old repertoire and learning some new repertoire. And I began programming large-scale romantic and impressionistic solo works without fear of injury. And also much more satisfaction regarding the musical outcomes. And my students with smaller handspans or with previous history of performance-related injuries began embracing the keyboard for their juries, for their recital performances, and often they would perform the first half of their recital on the conventional piano. Perhaps they were playing Bach and Mozart or Haydn. And then the second half of their recital, they were playing repertoire that they did not think they could play before the opportunity afforded itself with the keyboard. Not surprisingly, those with previous performance injuries were reporting healing, significant reduction in pain and discomfort, and increased stamina for practice. Above all, it was clear that all of us were experiencing better musical and technical outcomes. And then interestingly, I of course have students in my studio who have very large hands. And people asked, well, do you just really want to teach students with small hand spans? And I said, absolutely not. I am better suited than ever before to help students with large hand spans because now I'm replicating what they're doing on my piano side by side my hand looks like theirs finally, I can talk to them about fingerings for their hand size, and we are much more able to communicate because I have this flexibility to be on either keyboard. Okay, so around this time, then we were able to finally get the 6.0 keyboard, which I loved performing on for classical period in particular. And this is, I just thought I would give you so that you can see the piano on our stage. This was 2014, I believe. This is when we first got the 6.0. And I played with the orchestra, the Mozart 466, and then this is the Beethoven cadenza. And hopefully this will actually play for you. We'll try. But I just wanted to have a short excerpt here. Okay. So, and I probably should say, because this is something that almost everyone experiences, not everyone will agree with you in your university or in your setting that you are in. I had colleagues who thought, what a fantastic idea, and Carol, so happy you're doing this. And I also had colleagues that wondered why would you why would you put yourself in this situation where perhaps people question you as a pianist, um, or actually had some serious criticism from one or two people. Um, I never, I never let that bother me because it had to do with my own musical integrity. I knew that I was playing better, and that was the only thing that was important to me, is to play, to have a better musical outcome and more enjoyment while doing it. So next thing, some of the growth of the movement. I have here some of the universities where the keyboards can be found. There are actually more than is on this list right here, because we have some universities now that are actually borrowing the keyboards. That they have not yet purchased it, but they're borrowing it. Some of the things that happened over the last, let's say the first decade, I introduced the keyboards to other universities, and for instance, the University of North Texas is one that they had their own study that they did, a very extensive study. I was invited to play a solo recital at a national conference, and this is the National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy. It's a very important pedagogical conference in the United States, and I hope that some of you might be able to come to this conference or present at this conference. It's every other summer. That was a very important moment in 2007 when I was invited to play a recital on the keyboard. Mr. Steinbuehler brought the keyboard, and we brought in a particular Steinway. It worked out quite well. That was a very good introduction. I was invited to join that conference's committee on wellness, and so suddenly I was considered some expert on wellness. And you know, I suppose since this is a very, very important part of the of this movement, is keeping people from injury. And because there were so many of my students that were reporting that their injuries were disappearing, it just seemed like a very easy way to segue right into being someone who is an expert in wellness, just by the nature of the fact that I was providing this for people at my school. Children began studying on these keyboards in my private studio and in SMU's preparatory department. I didn't have very much time to teach children because my job was quite full as it was. However, a very talented young man came to me, and his mother asked if I would teach him. He was 9 years old. And I said, actually, I'll teach him if you will purchase a second instrument for your home, and you will allow me to teach him on both keyboards. They said yes, and it was an incredible experiment. We had lessons on both keyboards each week. So we would have half a lesson on the 5.5 and half lesson on the 6.5. He had particular repertoire for each keyboard, and we did technique on both keyboards. We had particular etudes for each keyboard, and we did scales on each one, arpeggios on each one. It was really very interesting. This child progressed incredibly quickly and was able to play Rachmaninoff, by the age of 11 or so. And he was able to understand this music. For so long, I had believed the idea that you don't give a child romantic repertoire too early because they're not going to understand it. And that wasn't the case at all. Of course, it had to do more with whether or not they were able to wrap their hands around it. Anyways, Aaron right now is at Yale University. He's just finished an artist diploma. He's a very, very fine pianist and a competition winner. He's in his 20s right now, and I think he has a phenomenal technique. Of course, his hands are quite large, and he long ago gave up the small keyboard. But I believe that the development of his technique at a young age made a huge difference for his career. Okay, so I would like to talk to you about international outreach. Um, so today my school, SMU's Meadow School of the Arts, it's internationally recognized as the first center for the performance and study of these keyboards. And each year, dozens of pianists visit SMU specifically to experience the keyboards. There's a long list of rather famous artists and pedagogues that have come through and tried the piano, as well as amateurs and teachers from all over the world. And sometimes they come for 1 to 3 days to immerse themselves. Maybe they are thinking of buying one, and so they want to decide which size suits them the best. And the keyboards also draw university applicants. And of course, the students want to have the opportunity, if they have small hand spans, to practice, perform, and record any of the great literature for piano, even with a small hand span. And even if they think that they're only going to be able to do that for those years that they're at SMU, they want the opportunity. So in 2013, SMU entered a collaborative venture with the Dallas Chamber Symphony. And we launched the Dallas International Piano Competition. And it was the only competition in the world that offered a choice of keyboard size to competitors. And so I was the primary SMU collaborator. And each year the keyboards drew a portion of the applicants. So in 2015, the winner of the third prize was Israeli pianist Anna Aratzi. And this is a picture of Anna here in the middle, with David Steinbuehler and I on either side of her. You can see Anna's quite a petite person. And she bravely and brilliantly performed her concerto and solo rounds on the DS 6.0 without ever having previously touched a DS keyboard. She just flew in, tried it out in the evening, and competed the following morning. Her response after her concerto round was pure exhilaration. She told me, "Usually when I perform this concerto, I experience such discomfort that I barely have the stamina to get to the end." We're talking about the Prokofiev first concerto. And she said, "Today I felt I could have played the entire concertos twice without stopping." And coming out of that first concerto round, she actually was the top seeded performer in the competition, and then ultimately won the third prize. So today the competition itself has unfortunately moved on to another venue and therefore no longer accommodates pianos with alternatively sized keys. However, we are planning a new competition that does. Okay, I just want to make sure. How are we doing here? All right. Everything's still good? All right, good. Okay, so Australia. More than a decade ago, a small keyboard movement began brewing in Australia, and two female pianists had independently discovered Mr. Steinbuehler. They had read about my work, and then they had their own pianos retrofitted with DS keyboards. And they facilitated an invitation for me to give a lecture recital at the 11th Australasian Piano Pedagogy Conference. That was 2013. And they arranged for me to give some solo recitals in Melbourne and Sydney. And I ended up playing 4 different size keyboards in all during that time. It was really fascinating. There was even a 15th, 16th keyboard built by Kawaii Pianos. And I find that Australians have a wonderful can-do attitude, and these 2 powerhouse women, Rhonda Boyle and Erica Booker, and we formed an advocacy organization called Pianists for Alternatively Scaled Piano Keyboards. And we found the internet to be a powerful tool, and PASC is represented as both now an informative website and a Facebook page. And nearly 1,500 individuals follow our Facebook page from at least 45 countries. The demographics show ages 25 to 35 to be the most interested age group. Males comprise 41% of our followers. And most of you might know that we have a petition on GoPetition that targets major piano manufacturers, trying to convince them to mass produce and market pianos with alternate key sizes. The petition currently has about 1,500 signatures from at least 35 countries. And then in the UK, a few years ago, I was approached by the editor of Piano Professional, and that's, of course, the journal for the UK branch of the European Piano Teachers Association. And they invited me to write a new article about the keyboards that resulted in an article called Size Does Matter. And that was published in their summer 2015 issue. And about that time, I was approached by the editor of the Clavier Companion in the US to write the cover article for their September 2015 issue. And this, I think, is maybe the most important article for me. It's called Size is Key. And it resulted in significant recognition and further acceptance of the keyboards in the United States. And so I was invited to some conferences and symposiums after that. And in that year, I also was able to, I was in Tokyo, and I was able to go to Hamamatsu and meet with leadership at the Yamaha Corporation to discuss the future possibilities and to stress adherence to specific size standards. You see, here we are in 2022. This is a long road, of course, dealing with major manufacturers because they want to know that it's going to be economically feasible. So they're looking to us to do the marketing research for them. In 2016, a long-time plan came to fruition, the release of my first solo CD recording. That's on the MSR label. And I entitled it Change of Keys. It spans 3 centuries of repertoire from Haydn to Bartók. It was recorded in the hall at our school on our Steinway D. Our Steinway D has 3 different actions. They reside backstage, and so we are able to quickly, within 5 minutes, change out the actions so that one Steinway has 3 actions, the 5.5, the 6.0, and the original 6.5. And so on the CD, as the repertoire progresses chronologically, I use progressively narrower keys. So I think that maybe I must have been the first pianist in the world to release a recording using 3 different size keyboards. But of course, there are historic recordings of people like Joseph Hoffman performing on his piano, customized with narrower keys. Um, and then we have this recording by Daniel Barenboim, um, on my new piano. And as you can see, his new piano has narrower keys. And this is a picture that was released on the internet of his action. And from what we can tell, it's slightly over 6.1 inches, the octave. Here's what he said about his new piano in an interview. I've fallen in love with my new piano and want to spend as much time with it as possible. And of course, you can see that he has programmed things like Liszt and the Chopin G minor ballade and things that are quite stretchy. Okay, so David Steinbuehler wanted his company to become a foundation. And this happened. It became a non-profit corporation in 2018, the Donison Steinbuehler Standard Foundation. And Rhonda Boyle, Australian Rhonda Boyle, and I are on the board of directors. The mission of the foundation is to set a standard for alternatively sized keyboards that's recognized globally, so that pianists, whether amateurs or professionals, may achieve their full musical potential while avoiding injury and perform with confidence anywhere in the world, knowing that a keyboard bearing this logo, DS logo, will be the size with which they're familiar. So our purposes are to encourage the availability of the keyboards and to raise awareness and to assist educational institutions in the acquisition of the keyboards. So we have lent these keyboards to several universities, not just in the United States, but in Europe, in South America, and in Australia. And this is something that I'm very, very excited about. It's helped quite a bit to introduce the keyboards to universities who are not quite sure yet whether they're ready to invest in this for themselves. And then early last year, in 2021, Rhonda Boyle and I were approached by another early adopter. Her name is Hannah Ryman. She lives in New York City, and she actually got her first narrower keyboard before I got the one at SMU. Together, Hannah and Rhonda and I created an online festival called the International Stretto Piano Festival, using the word stretto for narrow. And our tagline, narrow keys, broad minds, no boundaries. And we're so thrilled that pianists there in Stuttgart were able to participate in last year's festival for the first time, and then again this year. And this year we had pianists on 5 continents. I hope that some of you were able to watch the concerts from the 2022 festival. They're still available to watch, and will be for an unlimited amount of time, really. We expanded to almost 40 artists this year, and also Hannah has expanded it to live concerts in New York City. So anyone that's going to be in New York City that wants to play a recital on her Steinway fitted with a 5.9 size octave is welcome. She is sponsoring pianists there in Manhattan at her location where the piano is. And of course, that brings me to where I would like to be right now, where I was hoping to sit and play Sirius and maybe make a small recording and meet you personally. But now I've just been calling you all the European Center for the Movement. And I would like to tell you just a little bit more about specifically how we use the keyboards at SMU. Um, in my teaching studio, we have one grand piano with the 6.5 keyboard and one grand piano with the alternate size. So in my studio, we have the 5.5 as the alternate size, and students can practice on that piano when I'm not teaching in there. And then in our concert hall, we have two different Steinways, and one of them has the two alternate actions. Here you can see on the right the 5.5 in the Steinway. Our technician likes to make the switch out himself. However, I know how to do it myself. We have a cart, and it's not difficult to do. At home, I also have a Steinway D in my studio, and it also has two alternate actions. And I normally switch the actions out with my husband's help. However, since we have it on a cart, which is at the same height as the key bed, and because the cart is able to expand and open up, um, I'm able to switch the actions out myself by simply sliding it on out to the cart, flipping the cart around, and sliding the other keyboard in. So our practice rooms, we do have a practice room um, with a 6.0 in a Steinway B, and then we have 4 uprights with the 5.5. We would love to also have in the future a digital piano in the practice rooms and also in the class piano teaching room. We do have a strong preparatory department, so students, pre-college students, close to 100 students in that program, and select students have been able to take lessons and practice, and we actually have some uprights to lend to the families of those students, so they have a second piano in their home. So just to conclude, my main job is a piano professor, and I'm the chair of the Department of Piano Studies. So I really cannot promote narrow keyboards full time. However, with a much larger network of pianists, researchers, and educators working toward this goal, I'm always energized and then able to plan for exciting things to happen in the future. And I feel like I'm just sort of riding the wave now that other people are creating. My hope is to strengthen the network of pianists practicing and performing on these keyboards globally. So maybe that means facilitating more performance collaborations. Um, and I, I want to be able to not just talk about the need to embrace the alternate sizes, but to demonstrate excellence in performance and to maintain wellness and wholeness. I mean, that is always keeping the larger goal in mind. Um, and so that means that when students come to me, if they have, for instance, if they have need, I think, for the keyboard, but they have no interest, I don't push it. I pretty much let it happen naturally. For those students who feel they want to experiment with the keyboard, then I'm full out there to help them. Otherwise, we're simply working normally. Um, and if that means that their repertoire is limited, that's fine. That's what they feel most comfortable with. So that is part of dealing with wellness and wholeness of the individual, is respecting everyone's choices as well. So it's keeping a balance. While at the same time, I have this other life outside of the studio in which I'm extremely passionate about getting the word out to others. So these are the things that I wanted to talk to you about. And we've come to the end of this presentation. However, now I'm really excited about hearing from you, comments, and questions.